we keep seeing these stories coming out of Ukraine about human rights abuses. We keep seeing these stories coming out of Ukraine about the, taking over of the media, of arresting priests, closing down churches, right? And so we have a new report out today.
So the United States State Department released an updated report on human rights in Ukraine. Now, it reads like an absolute joke, like when your children are in trouble for something and their excuses, but they did it too. It is just a big pile of excuses for why Ukraine is corrupt. Now, this is a report that the State Department releases every year about all countries. It's sort of their narrative about who's corrupt and who's not, as if democracy is some kind of like stamp out that we can like judge other countries based on our own ideals of democracy. And if it's working just like us in one place, they get a good grade. If it's working badly in another place, they get a bad grade. So every country gets this report, and it was released this week. What we see here is the United States revising previous reports that admitted that Ukraine is a corrupt place with a dangerous faction of civilian armies. This is called the Security Service of Ukraine. We call it oftentimes the SBU. It's a civilian-led military and intelligence inside of Ukraine. Now, the State Department stopped calling them the SBU in 2020. Up until 2019, it always used that acronym. It's not an acronym. It's an initialism. An acronym is something you can pronounce. So it'd only be an acronym if I called it SPEW, which I'm not going to. So that makes it initialism. SPEW. Like Hermione Granger's,
right.
elf rights. Anyway, I've gone on a tangent. Anyway, in 2019, they mentioned the SBU 29 times. In 2020, they just stopped using this acronym. And in 2022, it's gone altogether. But in the report now, they mention Russia 517 times. So they list all of these human rights abuses that Ukraine has been up to and that they've been following every year. But they also released it with this quick follow-up, as in Russia did it too. So here is one of the main, sort of summaries of it. And they says that all of these things that Ukraine did, there were reports that members of security forces, that all of these abuses were done in the context of Russia's full-scale invasion. So yes, they did bad things, but they did them because of Russia. To which we ask, why were they doing bad things in 2019 or in the 2018 report or in the 2017 report? Don't know.
They did it, but for the right reasons.
Yes.
I embezzled all this money, but I did it for a good cause.
It's contextual.
Great.
Yeah.
It's hilarious because if you've seen the human rights abuses videos, and we're not going to talk about them here necessarily in great detail and probably get banned for it if we do, but people being duct taped to telephone poles and all sorts of horrible things done to them. They're doing that to their own citizens because of Russia.
Corruption does not exist in a vacuum.
Okay.
You have to have a reason.
You are partly correct because those people did speak Russian. So.
Oh, okay.
Many of them did, right?
Right.
So there is this summary of what the bad things are done here, and I'm going to put it up on the screen and not read it because of some of the social media policies about being pro Ukraine, but you can see it for yourself. It is a laundry list of violence against civilians, violence against journalists, crimes or threats motivated by anti-Semitism, crimes against people with disabilities, crimes against people's sexualities, arbitrary detention, not freedom of speech. Now, the report says that the government in Ukraine was granted all of these rights to do this, and they're doing it, but it's not comparable to the scope of Russia's abuses. So here's the list of all the things that we say they're doing, but by no means as bad as Russia, as if that's an excuse.
I love that sentence. We list like 100 things that Ukraine's guilty of, and it says, although not comparable to the scope of Russia's abuses.
He did it worse.
That's hilarious.
So this is really the tone that the U.S. State Department is using. The report says the government in Ukraine was granted martial law because of conflict with Russia, implying that they would not normally do this. So here's this section on torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment and punishment and other related abuses. Now, here's this year's, the 2022 ones. And it says that under normal circumstances, courts cannot legally use confessions and statements made under duress to police by persons in custody as evidence in court proceedings. But the institution of martial law since the Russian invasion permits this. Again, keep this in mind that this I'm showing you is from 2022 report released this week. But then look at the same section in 2019 saying that Ukraine does this, that they have been able to verify that they are using confessions and statements made under duress, and that happens. So
yeah, torture is the word torture is there.
Yes.
They've tortured people to get confessions.
So in 2022, they're saying they are doing this only because of Russia. But they also said they were doing it in 2019 when they had not that excuse.
And Congressman Ro Khanna specifically torpedoed a bill that where we were going to give funding to Ukraine. And he said because of these, he cited this specific State Department report as a reason to not give money to Ukraine because of human rights abuses.
Now, when you go back through all of the things that they say, now they say they're doing it, but they're doing it because of Russia. But again, if you read the report before the conflict began in 2022, these things were still in those reports in the past when there was no scapegoat of Russia. That is true pretty much across the board. Here's the report saying that freedom of expression has been suppressed. But again, because of Russia, because President Zelensky signed a decree imposing martial law when the invasion began, which permits further restriction of the media. So before, there was a concern about freedom of expression and the media, but now it's because of Russia that the government has banned, blocked, or sanctioned media outlets and individual journalists deemed a threat to national security who express positions of authority, yada, yada, yada. Now, clearly the U.S. is fine with that because the U.S. wants to keep using crises in order to give themselves power of censorship. We see this. We cover it all the time on the show, COVID, the election as it related to Hunter Biden. Those kind of things are fine to censor, if there's a crisis to pin it on. Arbitrary arrest of citizens. Yes, that is happening in Ukraine. The U.S. admits it. Here it says that the OHCHR claimed the security service of Ukraine, which we used to call the SBU, we don't anymore.
Oh, they've been rebranded now.
May have violated the due process of more than 1,000 individuals. It reportedly arrested between February 24th and May 15th of suspicion of supporting Russia's forces. Now, we've shown you videos here of people, the Associated Press going along with the SBU to break into people's houses because they express support for Russia on social media. That is a violation. It's arbitrary arrest or detention.
We showed you that video on the show and we got blocked for it. We showed you that video of the Associated Press doing that ride along with the SBU. Like we went along with and it was like they were promoting this because it's, state-run media as Associated Press.
You're pro-Russia on Facebook? Here you go. You're coming in with us. And the guy's like, what? I won't. I'll delete it. I don't want to go with you.
Yeah. He's like, I'm Russian. So I'm a Russian, but okay. And they're like, what are you? And it's like, boom, boom, boom.
Well, now the State Department says they don't think that's a good thing. It's happening, but Russia, because they had to. And they mentioned that in some cases, civilians are carrying out punishment. Now, this is saying in most cases, when there's this sort of extrajudicial punishment of individuals, civilians carried out extrajudicial punishments, including... should I not say this out loud?
I don't know what you're going to say.
The highlighted part.
Well, I mentioned it that, tying people to electricity poles and pulling off their clothes and doing horrible things to them.
Okay. So civilians carrying this out. The United States State Department is saying this happens.
You can see those videos all over Twitter if you want to see them. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of them. Like you can't hide that anymore.
Of course, we have been reporting this on this show, and we know that many weapons from the West are ending up in the hands of civilians, and that civilians now are empowered to take matters into their own hands with dire consequences. Torturing and capturing captured prisoners. Yes, they say this is happening, but Russia. There were reports of Ukrainian security forces and Russian forces abusing civilians and captured fighters, with, of course, the vast majority of them done by Russia. We don't know why they say this. They don't seem to have proof for it, but they're just saying, yeah, it happens, but mostly the Russians are doing it. Again, you can rewind the tape to previous reports that were saying this without Russia as a scapegoat, but now they've got it, so they're going to use it. And I guess, that makes it okay if Russia did it first. This report just goes on and on. I encourage you to read it. There are entire sections that blame Russia for civilian attacks that we now know were carried out by the Ukrainian army. Freedom of religion, nope. That's no longer a thing in Ukraine, again, because of Russia.
Does it mention the list?
Oh.
No, I did not see that. It's really long. And it's funny, the journalists that they mentioned, they do not mention Gonzalo Lira, who was detained, who is an American. Is he a citizen or he's a resident?
He's a citizen and a Chilean citizen too. He has dual citizenship. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they sort of cherry pick who they've decided they're upset about. What did I just mention? Freedom of religion, government corruption. Yes, the State Department does say that corruption in the government is a problem. They don't mention Zelensky. They say that he was elected in what they considered was a fair election. But they, want us to continue to think that their government is worthy of like the Oscars and the, congressional addresses and the celebrity Vogue. Says the government generally did not take adequate steps to prosecute or punish officials who committed abuse, resulting in a climate of impunity. The government did take some steps to identify, prosecute, and punish officials involved in corruption. So these are two opposing sentences, don't you say? The government generally did not take adequate steps, but they took some steps. Stupidest sentences I've ever seen.
Government speak. Yeah. They didn't do enough, but they did enough.
But they did something.
They did some things. And Russia.
Yes. Now, are we saying Russia did not do these things? We're not saying that. This is an investigation based on the U.S. State Department. Are we saying Ukraine should get a pass? No. This is a big pile of excuses, and you should never accept excuses in life. I'm going to say that unequivocally. Excuses should never be accepted. And I'm questioning why the State Department wants to give Ukraine this whole big document full of excuses for corruption when reportedly we're there to protect democracy. And why is the United States then using this as an excuse to then continue aid in Ukraine, as it did just commit $350 million in extra aid, just announced yesterday in the run-up for this expected spring offensive?
Well, they want regime change and they want to use Ukraine as a proxy because of Russia. I guess
you're not supposed to read the document and then read previous years and say, but this corruption existed before you had Russia, to stick into these paragraphs.
I mean, what about Bill Gates in the just a few weeks ago saying publicly that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt governments in the world and you would never want to do business there? That was Bill Gates, whose Microsoft literally runs all of the servers for the Ukrainian government.
Yeah.
Okay. And
in a way
still
that
makes $20 billion from them. Yeah.
A way that you can find information, because if you go to Google right now and you search war in Ukraine or anything on Ukraine, you get all this propaganda. But if you say corrupt Ukraine 2013, put a year on it, you'll find the articles that were written back then about it being the most corrupt, about the Hydra agents and all that stuff. You can find all of that if you tie a year to your search.
You don't even have to go back that far. I mean, this was a talking point as recently as 2020. You really saw that the report turns over if you read them in 2021. But up until 2020, when they stopped using the SBU initialism, it was pretty clear that the United States felt like Ukraine is a very problematic state.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.